The news didn't arrive gently. It hit the council chamber like a hammer dropped from orbit. No warning, no cushioning, just a blunt, irreversible impact. Someone whispered the words into the private ear of the presiding moderator, and the air seemed to thin before the official voice carried them aloud. Eden 5, the Imperial Patrol opened fire on a primary school during midday recess. 214 human children confirmed dead. The chamber did not erupt in outrage, not immediately. There was the soft sound of clothing shifting as delegates turned to one another, murmurs flitting like dust in the light. For most species gathered, human was still a novelty term, a young upstart people with charming eccentricities and an endearing lack of galactic history. 200 years in the stars was infancy compared to the Council's ancient dynasties. The death of children was regrettable, tragic, yes, but to them it was not yet unthinkable, not yet personal. At the far edge of the U-shaped dais, Captain Elias Marin stood very still, tall by human standards, but unremarkable among the towering insectoid Sylvath or the winged Nirathans. He wore the plain-cut formal uniform of the Terran Diplomatic Corps, dark navy with understated silver trim. His hands rested lightly on the bench before him, his expression open, polite. If anyone noticed the tightening at the corners of his eyes, they did not remark on it. The imperial delegate, a broad-shouldered, scaled Carixian, rose with deliberate dignity. His voice rolled across the hall in a practiced tone of regret. A security miscalculation. Our patrols encountered armed resistance within the settlement perimeter. They were children, Elias said. His voice did not rise, yet it cut through the air like the slow draw of a blade from its sheath. The Carixian blinked with a slow, vertical closure of his nictitating membranes. Children who may have been used as shields. No, Elias didn't lean forward, didn't glare. He simply met the alien's gaze, unflinching, and the silence that followed was thick enough to press against the walls. A Lothari counselor, 3 meters of skeletal elegance draped in translucent silk, shifted the subject with the ease of someone accustomed to smoothing over messes. We must avoid escalating tensions. Humanity is still under the protection of the Treaty of Nyrus. It is not in anyone's interest to. Elias smiled. It was a small, almost apologetic thing, as though he'd stumbled into a room he hadn't meant to enter. You misunderstand, he said softly. We have no interest in escalation. The room eased imperceptibly. A few delegates exchanged nods, the way one might when coaxing a skittish animal away from a fence line. Elias continued. Escalation implies a back and forth. Tit for tat. Blow for blow. That's not how we do things. His words were gentle, but something in them left a faint chill, like the first shadow passing over a sunny day. The Carixian delegate shifted uneasily, but before he could speak, the moderator, an orb-like creature whose language shimmered in colored light, intervened. The council will enter recess. Parties involved will convene privately to clarify the situation. Chairs scraped. Conversations picked up like cautious engines. Elias inclined his head to the moderator, to the other delegates, to no one in particular. Then he turned and walked out. The corridor outside was a study in sterile luxury. Polished stone floors, arched windows looking down over the swirling gold storms of the planet below. Elias moved without hurry, as though he had nowhere pressing to be. His aide, a young man named Kieran, caught up 2 turns later. They'll bury this, Kieran said under his breath. Elias's expression didn't shift. Perhaps. They'll claim we were warned about unrest on Eden 5, that we. They've already decided what to claim. Elias stopped, looking out one of the windows. From here, the planet's atmosphere resembled poured honey, slow and viscous. We'll decide what to do with the truth. Kieran hesitated. Sir, the President's office will want to. They'll hear from me, Elias said, after I've spoken to Karima. The name hung in the air, and the aide fell silent. 2 hours later, Elias stepped into a small, dim conference room on the station's lower levels. The difference from the council chamber was jarring. Here the walls were matte black, the lighting subdued, the table bare except for a pot of coffee and 3 battered mugs. General Karima Holt was already there. Her short silver hair cropped close to the skull, her dark eyes unreadable. She wore civilian clothes, a soft sweater, sleeves pushed up to the elbow, but nothing about her posture was relaxed. "They shot children," Elias said without preamble. "I heard," Karima replied. She didn't look away from him as she poured coffee into one of the mugs. "How many?" 214. Karima stirred her coffee once, then set the spoon aside. "They'll call it an accident, a misunderstanding. Maybe they'll offer to pay for repairs to the school." Repairs. Elias tasted the word as though it were ash. The third figure in the room, Admiral Owen Pierce, leaned back in his chair. Broad, weathered, with the slow, deliberate movements of a man who'd spent his life balancing on decks in heavy seas. He spoke for the first time. "Treaty's clear. Technically, we could call for an inquiry." "An inquiry buys them time," Karima said. "Time to spin the narrative, scrub the records, intimidate witnesses." Elias sat, hands flat on the table. "We don't need an inquiry. We need a decision." Pierce arched a brow. "And the president?" "He'll follow if the path is laid," Elias said. "This isn't about his appetite for risk. It's about giving him no choice." Karima sipped her coffee. "And the council? They think we'll snarl a bit, demand apologies, maybe pull a few trade routes for show." Elias's smile returned, thin and knowing. "They think we're still pretending to be like them." Karima's eyes sharpened. "Are we?" The smile deepened by a fraction. "Not anymore." News feeds across the core worlds ran softened versions of the incident, accompanied by stock images of human cities bathed in sunset light, happy children laughing in classrooms. The official imperial statement described regrettable civilian casualties during a necessary security operation against insurgent threats. Elias watched none of it. He spent the next 48 hours in sealed communications with people whose names never appeared in public directories. Messages went out in encrypted bursts. Supply manifests shifted subtly, rerouting through out-of-the-way depots. Civilian transports in human space received sudden maintenance orders, pulling them to port. From the outside, humanity seemed to be retreating inward, curling protectively around its worlds. From the inside, something vast and disciplined was waking from a long sleep. 3 days after the council session, Elias returned to the chamber. The agenda was routine, trade disputes, environmental accords, the usual theater. The Carixian delegate avoided his gaze. A few others nodded politely. When called upon to address the assembly, Elias rose, hands clasped lightly before him. His voice was warm, even pleasant. "We've considered the matter of Eden 5 carefully," he began. "We have no desire for further bloodshed. None." Relief rippled across the alien faces. "We will, however, be conducting our own resolution process." The words were mild, but something in the cadence made the Sylvath delegation glance sharply at one another. "This process," Elias continued, "will be thorough, efficient, final. We encourage the Empire to cooperate, for their sake." There was no overt threat in his tone, yet the chamber was suddenly too quiet. Even the faint hum of the climate regulators seemed to fade. Elias inclined his head to the moderator. "Thank you for your attention." He sat, calm as a man waiting for a train that was already on its way. That evening, Karima received a single-line message from Elias. Tag Priority 1. "They've mistaken our patience for mercy." It was not a complaint. It was a diagnosis, and it was about to be corrected. The room was underground, windowless, built of reinforced basalt quarried from Luna's southern craters. Its walls drank sound. The only light came from a series of low fixtures above the long oval table, each beam casting a tight circle onto the faces seated there. Elias Marin arrived without ceremony, setting his datapad down before taking a seat. General Karima Holt was already present, her sweater traded for a fitted black service jacket that carried no insignia. Her authority needed none. Admiral Owen Pierce sat at the far end, a mug of something that smelled like burned cinnamon in front of him, steam curling in the chill air. The moment Elias sat, Karima spoke. "Outer colonies are locked down. Civilian movement is down 70%. most of it just home to supply runs. We've pulled shipping manifests from the open channels. The Empire doesn't have a clean red on anything leaving our borders. Pierce gave a slow nod, a sailor's nod, acknowledgement without celebration. Fleet's been running training drills at the edges of Imperial space. Old hulls, outdated drives. We're letting their spotters see them. Elias leaned back, hands loose in his lap. Let them think we've got nothing sharper. Karima's eyes flicked to him. They already think that. Question is how long we let the illusion live. There was a pause, and in it, the air seemed to grow denser. Elias broke it with the tone of a man discussing weather patterns. Not long. They killed children. You can't walk that back. Not with a treaty, not with money, not with time. The words settled over the table. Karima did not look away. Pierce, for all his gruffness, glanced down at his mug as though it might contain an answer. The door slid open, and 3 more figures entered. Commander Shea Rourke, lean and restless, a tactical prodigy with the social grace of a boulder. Dr. Lena Voss, intelligence chief, her dark hair bound in a severe knot. And Minister Holland Croy, the closest thing the Terran coalition had to a political artist. Together, they made the table feel full, though no one raised their voice above a conversational murmur. Lena laid a file on the table. Intercepted Imperial chatter. They've classified Eden 5 as a closed incident. Their internal investigation's a sham. They've already cleared the officers involved. Karima's jaw set. They're counting on us to snarl for a few months and move on. Croy folded his hands. We could leverage this. Play to the Council's sympathy, push for sanctions. No, Elias's voice was almost gentle, but it cut across the table. No speeches. No petitions. No half measures that make the Empire think they've paid a price. Shea's mouth quirked, the faintest shadow of a grin. So we're doing it the old way. Elias met his eyes. We're doing it the final way. They spoke then of logistics, each word carrying more weight than the volume suggested. Routes were identified, not for trade, but for the movement of munitions, hidden inside containers marked as agricultural supplies. Orbital stations were quietly emptied of civilians under the guise of safety inspections. Shipyards in the belt received new orders for retrofit projects that would, in a matter of weeks, turn cargo haulers into armored troop carriers. To any outside observer, humanity was simply closing ranks, tending its wounded pride. Inside, they were sharpening every blade they owned. The alien envoys noticed, of course. The first to come was a delegation from the Red Hari Commonwealth, tall, pale, long-necked beings with eyes like shallow seas. They met Elias in a polished conference room high above Earth's surface, its windows framing the curve of the planet. "We understand your grief," said their lead delegate, the words drawn out in the referee's slow cadence. "But war will only." Elias raised a hand, smiling faintly. "We appreciate your concern, truly. But this is a family matter. We'll handle it ourselves." The Red Hari blinked in unison, a sign of polite withdrawal. They left without securing a promise of restraint. 2 days later, the CERN Syndicate sent their emissary, a scaled, feline-featured dignitary named Varen, who prowled the perimeter of Elias's office before speaking. "Humans have survived by trading cleverly, making alliances. You risk losing that." Elias poured him a drink, amber and strong. "We risk more by teaching the galaxy that killing our children costs nothing. Tell your people we have no quarrel with them." Varen took the drink. He did not take the warning for anything less than what it was. Back in the underground chamber, Karima read from the latest intel dispatch. "Imperial analysts think our fleet posture is defensive. They believe our shipyards are behind schedule, our fuel stores low." Pierce snorted. "They always did underestimate our supply game." Elias's smile was almost invisible. "Good. Let's give them more to underestimate." The screen at the table's center flickered to life, showing footage from an Imperial spy drone, a Terran convoy moving through deep space. The ships looked aged, paint-scuffed, drives leaving uneven light trails. "Those hulls," Shea said, "are running next-gen drive cores and double armor plating. On paper, they're a bunch of old freighters. In practice. In practice, Karima finished, they're wolves in farm clothes. Outside the inner circles, life for the average human seemed unchanged. Markets opened, transports departed on schedule, entertainment channels buzzed with inconsequential scandals. The calm was calculated. Every action, every broadcast, was part of a cover, so tight even many human citizens believed it. But in certain places, the hangars carved into asteroid shadows, the subterranean factories humming 3 shifts a day, the truth was loud enough to shake stone. Massive drive housings rolled out under tarps. Crates of munitions were stamped with false trade labels. Combat simulations ran in virtual spaces that left no data trail. In the midst of it all, a curious thing happened. Humans began disappearing from the usual social spaces of the council station. The bars and lounges where Terran delegates once mingled with alien peers went quiet. No one announced a boycott, but the absence was felt. The few who still appeared smiled, made polite conversation, and said nothing of substance. Alien gossip networks churned. Some whispered that humanity was sulking. Others thought the Eden 5 massacre had broken their spirit. The most dangerous rumor, circulating only in hushed corners, suggested that humans had gone silent for the same reason predators do before a strike. One evening, as a deep blue dusk settled over the sprawl of Neo-Toronto, Elias stood on a balcony outside the presidential residence. Below, the city's lights reflected in the water like scattered constellations. President Malric joined him, the 2 men watching in silence for a long moment. "You're going to force my hand," Malric said finally. Elias didn't look at him. "I'm going to give you the only hand worth playing. Do you understand the scale of what you're proposing?" "I understand the scale of what they've already done." Malric exhaled slowly, as though weighing something heavier than oxygen. "The council will call it madness." "They called the first moon landing madness," Elias replied. "They called crossing the Atlantic in wooden ships madness. They called standing up to empires madness. It's a word people use when they're too comfortable to imagine necessity. And if we fail?" Elias turned then, meeting his gaze. "We won't." The certainty in his voice was not arrogance. It was the sound of a man who had already seen the shape of the board, the placement of every piece. A week later, the first real movement began. Covert strike teams departed under the guise of long-range survey missions. Special operations units rotated quietly from border patrols to classified training facilities. Fleet command orders went out in code embedded in routine maintenance logs. Karima reviewed each dispatch personally, her hand steady even when her eyes burned from lack of sleep. Pierce coordinated the fleet drills with the sailors' patience, knowing the crews needed to be sharp but invisible. Lena's networks flooded Imperial channels with harmless misinformation, tiny, believable lies that would point them in every direction but the right one. One night, over a pot of coffee in the war room, Shay leaned forward on his elbows. "You think they know?" Elias, pouring himself a cup, said, "I think they suspect something. But suspicion isn't knowing. And by the time they know, it won't matter." Shay chuckled. "Feels like hunting season." Elias glanced at him, a trace of that thin, unreadable smile on his face. "It is." When the next council session convened, Elias attended. He listened politely to debates about trade disputes between 2 outer systems, about the ethics of terraforming low-population worlds. His turn to speak never came. That suited him. As the session adjourned, the Corixian delegate, the same one who had called the Eden 5 slaughter a security miscalculation, approached him. "Captain Marin, I trust matters are cooling." Elias's gaze was steady, his voice pleasant. "Cooling. Yes. That's one way to describe it." The Corixian, perhaps reassured by the tone, nodded and withdrew. Elias watched him go, the smile still in place. To anyone else, it was the expression of a diplomat maintaining cordial ties. To those who knew him, it was the curve of a blade catching light just before it moves. By the end of the week, every human fleet in known space was either in motion or in position to be. The public didn't see it, the council didn't feel it, not yet. But in the hidden corridors of power, in the whispered updates between commanders, the truth was undeniable. humanity was no longer gathering in grief. They were gathering in readiness. And somewhere in the dark between stars, the wolves were already moving toward the scent. The message to the imperial high seat went out in the smallest hours of the Terran night. It was written in plain language, devoid of embellishment, a single page transmitted through every official and back-channel line humanity possessed. We request the surrender of all officers responsible for the Eden 5 massacre within 24 hours. This is not a threat. It is an opportunity. There was no signature, no title, only Terran coalition. By sunrise in Geneva, the reply was already public, a hollow broadcast from the Imperial Ministry of Defense, showing a Carixian general in ceremonial armor. His voice was thick with scorn. We do not yield to the demands of lesser species. Humanity will learn its place. The feed cut to footage of Imperial Marines laughing in a barracks. One held up a child's toy, bright plastic, spattered with dirt, and tossed it to another, who crushed it casually in his clawed fist. In the underground war room, no one spoke as the clip played. When it ended, Elias reached forward, paused the feed, and stared at the frozen frame of the Marines mid-laughter. His voice was quiet. Archive that. Every copy, every angle. Karima's expression was carved from granite. 24 hours. 24, Elias confirmed. Pierce leaned back, the leather of his chair creaking. And then, Elias said, we stopped pretending. The clock began to tick. At the 6-hour mark, Imperial comms across 3 sectors began to experience technical anomalies. Starship navigation AIs reported contradictory coordinates. Shuttles found themselves redirected to empty space. Orbital defense grids began cycling their own targeting sensors without authorization. By the 10th hour, Imperial diplomats were demanding explanations in the council chamber. Elias listened from the gallery, the picture of polite detachment. Solar flare interference, he suggested mildly when addressed directly. Terrible timing. No one believed him, but no one could prove otherwise. At the 15th hour, entire Imperial fleet movements vanished from their own tracking systems. Ships drifted in the dark, powerless, their crews locked out of command functions, as every console began to play a human lullaby, slow, sweet, unyielding. Somewhere in the Empire's core sectors, an old nursery rhyme began to echo across encrypted military channels, the words translated into dozens of tongues. It had no malice in its tone, only the infuriating softness of a voice that knew exactly what it was doing. By the 20th hour, Imperial analysts were in chaos. They still thought they were facing sabotage. None of them had yet realized that the sabotage was already complete. The 24th hour came and went without an Imperial surrender. In the silence after the deadline, humanity's first strike fell. It began not with orbital bombardments, but with boarding actions. Human Marines, dressed in matte black combat skins that seemed to drink in the light, descended on an Imperial dreadnought patrolling the far edge of Sector Rho 11. The ship's mass alone was enough to anchor a small moon. Its crew outnumbered the boarding force 12-1. It was over in 11 minutes. When the dreadnought's captain was dragged into the command hall, still breathing, he found Elias Marin waiting for him, not in battle armor, but in a tailored diplomatic coat, hands clasped behind his back. How? The captain demanded, breath ragged. Elias's smile was almost kind. We've been practicing for 2,000 years. The dreadnought was seized intact, its systems gutted for intel before the crew even realized they were prisoners. The boarding footage was leaked deliberately into the same Imperial networks that had laughed at Eden 5. The effect was immediate. Laughter turned to silence. The Empire's first counterstroke came fast, an armada sweeping toward what they believed to be a vulnerable Terran outpost near the Myrith Belt. Their scouts reported outdated defense platforms, minimal garrison. They never reached firing range. Hidden among the asteroid shadows were Terran destroyers with stealth profiles, so fine they could slide past deep space sensors undetected. They emerged in silence, fired in synchronized bursts, and vanished back into the dark. By the time the Imperial flagship registered the attack, Half its escorts were already debris. From the Empire's perspective, it was as though the humans were fighting with ghosts. The Council could no longer pretend neutrality. Delegates filled the chamber, voices layered in panic, protest, and stunned fascination. Some demanded a ceasefire. Others urged the Council to intervene against the humans. A few, very few, spoke of allowing the war to burn itself out. Elias attended only to listen. When pressed, he answered with the same measured courtesy. "We are not here to seek permission. We are here to conclude unfinished business." One Lothari counselor leaned across the table, silk sleeves brushing the polished surface. "Do you mean to destroy them?" Elias's eyes held hers. "We mean to remove the possibility of another Eden 5. Permanently." Back in the war room, Karima oversaw the next wave. "They've pulled 2 fleets back toward the core. Just like we wanted." Pierce nodded. "They think we're chasing vengeance. We're actually hurting." Shay grinned wolfishly from his seat at the far console. "They'll figure it out." Elias poured himself coffee, unhurried. "By then they'll be standing exactly where we want them." The war spilled into open channels, every faction watching. Reports came of Terran task forces appearing inside fortified Imperial space without warning. Colonies thought untouchable were seized without orbital damage, their garrisons surrendering to squads that moved with unnerving precision. Every captured officer was given the same treatment. They were shown the archived footage of Eden 5 in silence, and then sent to holding cells without a word. The point did not need to be explained. Somewhere in the chaos, a phrase began circulating among alien observers: "The teeth are out." 2 weeks into the campaign, a Council intelligence operative named Jane approached Elias in a quiet docking bay. Jane's species had no visible pupils, but his voice carried a weight of reluctant respect. "I thought humans built ships for show," he said. "I thought you only fought when cornered." Elias regarded him for a moment. "You thought wrong. What happens when the Empire sues for peace?" Elias's smile was patient. "They won't. And if they do, then," Elias said, "we'll see if they mean it." On the Empire's 3rd largest world, a massive military parade was interrupted by a sudden blackout. The sky darkened, the power grid collapsed, and when emergency systems flickered on, every screen displayed a single image: the Eden 5 schoolhouse before the massacre. Children smiling in the midday sun. There was no text, no demand, just the image. By morning, 4 Imperial governors had resigned. The shift was visible in their opponents' eyes. Imperial pilots, once confident, began breaking formation at the first sign of Terran ships. Captains ordered retreats at smaller and smaller provocations. Rumors spread of Terran units that could operate without supply lines for months, that could infiltrate cities without being seen, that could erase entire data archives in minutes. For once, the rumors understated the truth. Late one evening, Elias stood alone in the observation deck of the carrier Resolute Dawn. Below, the curve of a captured Imperial world glowed faintly in the dark. Karima joined him without speaking for a long while. "They're scared," she said at last. "They should be," Elias replied. "This doesn't end when we break their fleets." "No," he agreed. "It ends when they understand why." Karima glanced at him. "And if they never do?" Elias's eyes remained on the planet below, unblinking. "Then it doesn't end." Word reached them that the Imperial High Seat had issued a private order to relocate command functions deep into the core, consolidating power where the human fleets could not reach without enormous risk. Elias read the report, closed it, and said, "Perfect." Pierce leaned forward. "You're saying you want them to pull in tight. It's easier to close a trap when your prey walks into it willingly." The others at the table exchanged glances, each understanding that the next phase would not be limited strikes or surgical captures. It would be decisive. The map of the galaxy glowed in the dim light, Imperial space shrinking under the pressure of Terran advances. From a distance, it resembled a creature curling in on itself. Elias traced a finger toward the Imperial core worlds. "This is where it ends. And when it does, there will never be another Eden 5. His voice was calm, But the air in the room shifted, as if everyone present could feel the weight of something vast and irreversible about to move. Far above that war room, beyond the reach of any comm traffic, fleets lay in wait, silent, patient, teeth bared. The Imperial retreat was everything Elias had predicted, messy, frantic, driven more by fear than by strategy. Their fleets bled territory in wide arcs, abandoning outer colonies, consolidating their defenses around the glittering spines of the core worlds. From the Council's balconies and the neutral world broadcasts, it looked like survival. From the Terran war maps deep in the belly of the Resolute Dawn, it looked like prey running straight into the snare. "They think they're regaining control," Karima said, standing with arms folded as the hollow projection pulsed in shades of red and blue. "But all they're doing is clearing our approach." Pierce's gravelly voice rumbled from the far side of the table. "They'll fortify the core. Layered shields, orbital guns, planetary AIs running predictive targeting." "Good," Elias murmured, his eyes fixed on the shrinking red halo of Imperial reach. "We've built this entire campaign to make them think that's the smart play." In the weeks leading to this moment, human fleets had moved like smoke, appearing in unexpected sectors, vanishing before retaliation, drawing Imperial pursuit along predictable lines. Every engagement, every capture, every feigned withdrawal had been calculated to funnel their enemy inward. It was war as a shepherd's crook, guiding without seeming to. Shay Rourke entered with the easy swagger of a man who enjoyed the part of the hunt just before the kill. Perimeter teams report all civilian traffic in the core is being pulled into secured ports. Military convoys only. We've already infiltrated half their supply line with our own transports. Elias glanced up. "Any suspicion?" Shay grinned. "None they'll act on. They're too busy trying to keep their admirals from strangling each other over who gets the flagship assignments." The mood in the room was steady but taut, a bowstring drawn back for days. Even in silence, the unspoken truth pressed at the edges. There would be no second chance. If the trap failed, the war would spiral into a years-long bleed. Karima tapped the map. "Our forward elements are in position. Once we breach the core's outer defense grid, there's no turning back. You sure the fleet at Varys Prime will hold?" Pierce's mouth curved faintly. "They'll hold. I told them they'd be the first to dock at Imperial Command when this is over. They'll bleed for that honor." Elias let the discussion play out, weighing each piece. Finally, he said, "It's time." The first stage unfolded in silence. In the black gulf beyond the Imperial core, human dreadnoughts emerged from the Oort cloud shadows. Colossal vessels the galaxy had never seen, their hulls built without ornament, every surface an expression of purpose. They were the product of centuries of secret construction, each crew trained in isolation for a war no one had dared admit might come. Imperial long-range sensors caught glimpses, filed reports, and dismissed them as ghost readings. Human warships weren't supposed to be this large, this numerous, this ready. By the time the readings were verified, the dreadnoughts had already moved into assault range. Karima's voice carried over the fleet comms, level and cold. Phase 1 execute. Within minutes, the outermost ring of the Imperial defense grid went dark, its power nodes surgically severed by precision strikes from ships the enemy never saw. Relay stations fell silent. Planetary shield generators overloaded, then failed entirely, their collapse hidden beneath the roar of the capital's emergency broadcasts. Elias watched it all from the command deck, his expression unreadable. "Hold positions," he ordered. "Let them scramble." They did. Imperial fleets surged toward the breaches, pulling ships from one sector to cover another, chasing phantom readings, colliding with false data injected by Terran cyberops. Their once impenetrable perimeter fractured under the strain of trying to be everywhere at once. Phase 2, Elias said. From the dark, the second wave came, strike cruisers threading through the gaps like knives between armor plates. They weren't there to win pitched battles. They were there to cut. Supply lines, communication hubs, command relays. Every artery of the Imperial war machine was severed, bleeding efficiency into chaos. On the bridge of the Resolute Dawn, a comm officer turned from her console. Admiral Vareth of the Imperial Second Fleet is requesting direct parley. Decline, Elias said. Transmit recorded acknowledgement only. Karima looked at him. You don't think it's worth hearing them out? Not while they still think they have options. The turning point came 12 hours later. With the outer grid in shambles, Imperial Command drew its last reserves inward, forming a wall of warships around the homeworlds. It was a line meant to project strength. To Terran eyes, it was a bottleneck begging to be sealed. Shay's voice came over the secure channel from his forward position. Core fleets locked in. We close the door now. They won't get another chance to run. Close it, Elias replied. The Terran flanks surged forward, not in the wild, chaotic rush of desperation, but with the measured precision of an executioner's step. Mines hidden in asteroid fields drifted into firing positions. Covert orbital platforms, long embedded under the guise of merchant stations, dropped their civilian facades and deployed weapons arrays. The corridor into the Imperial core narrowed to a single navigable route, and there, humanity's heaviest warships waited, silent. Imperial Command didn't see it until the last freighter convoy reported in panic. There's no way out. The Terrans are here. In the council chamber, the reaction was immediate. Delegates shouted over one another, demanding to know if humanity intended total annihilation. A few called for sanctions against the Terran coalition, others begged for mediation. Elias, summoned to respond, stood with his hands loosely clasped. We asked for justice, he said evenly. We were refused. We asked for the surrender of the guilty. We were mocked. Now we will ensure that the Empire cannot harm us again. And at what cost? Demanded the Lothari counselor. Elias met her gaze. Whatever cost prevents the next Eden 5. He left before they could vote on any resolution. Back in the war room, the final briefings were underway. Karima's tone was all steel. Once we breach, we take their command intact if possible. Kill as few as necessary to hold the site. Every officer captured alive is a message. This isn't slaughter, it's removal. Pierce nodded. Fleet is primed. They'll move on your word. Elias looked from face to face, memorizing them. The ones who had planned, waited, and bled in silence. Begin final approach. The order rippled outward. Engines flared in the dark. On Imperial long-range sensors, the encircling Terran fleets finally resolved into unmistakable signatures. There was no subtlety left, no room for misinterpretation. The trap was visible now, but too late to escape. Karima watched the enemy movements with a predator's calm. They're panicking. Elias's voice was soft, almost gentle. Let them. The first salvos lit the void, the black between worlds flashing with streaks of white and gold. Imperial ships fought with desperation, but their formations crumbled under precision strikes that seemed to anticipate every move before it was made. Terran fire didn't waste itself on heavy armor. It targeted engines, comms, and weapons arrays, leaving vast vessels drifting helplessly. On the resolute dawn, the comm board lit with incoming surrender requests. Elias ignored them. We take command first. Then we decide who gets to surrender. Pierce's fleet drove straight through the central axis, breaking the Imperial line in under an hour. By the time the second wave entered, the defenders were already folding inward, retreating toward their homeworld's last shielded citadel. Karima gave the final ground directive. Secure their command spire. Minimal collateral. Dropships launched in tight formation, vanishing into the planet's upper atmosphere. Elias stood at the observation deck, watching the planet swell beneath them, its oceans glittering in the light of its twin suns. He thought of Eden 5, not of the smoke and the blood, but of the photographs taken before, the laughter and the bright paint on the school's outer walls. The memory was not sentimental. It was fuel. On the comm, Karima's voice came, clear and steady. Command spire secured. Resistance minimal. They didn't think we'd get this far.